I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm the director of Laasok. Laasok, as many of you know, is a virtual liberal Beit Midrash. It's a community of learners who come together to study our sacred text through a progressive Jewish lens and in an inclusive environment. I'm really excited today for this sixth installment of the Social Justice in Our Texts series. As we begin, I want to convey very deep thanks to two members of the Laasok community who helped make this program possible, and that's Robert Goldman and Lauren Davis, both of whom I believe are here with us, as well as to all of you who made contributions to help support this program. I'm also grateful and proud of all of our partner organizations who come together to make this series happen. I'm just going to list them out here. The Central Conference of American Rabbis, the CCAR Press, Tzedek Box, Dayenu, a Jewish call for climate justice, the Union for Reform Judaism, Kirva, Keeping It Sacred, who we'll hear more about in just a moment, Central Synagogue, Temple Israel of Greater Miami, and Temple of Israel in Wilmington, North Carolina. So without any further ado, let me introduce our speaker, and then I'll turn it over to her. Rabbi Heather Miller is an author, officiant, advocate, teacher, preacher, and speaker. She is the author of Resolutions, which is a wonderful book that includes an entry a day for the month of Elul. So as we come up on the high holy days, you can pick up her book. She's going to display it on her screen now.
Yeah.
She's the founder of Keeping It Sacred. Keeping It Sacred is one of the sponsoring partners of this Social Justice in Our Text series. So let me just mention that it is a global progressive Jewish community dedicated to the intrepid exploration of sacred texts, the practice of meaningful rituals, and the unwavering pursuit of social justice. On any given day, Rabbi Miller can be found around town, officiating weddings, studying Talmud, speaking on any number of topics to various groups, meeting with community members, working on social justice, writing her next book, or enjoying quality time with her wife, Melissa, and their two kids. So with great thanks to all of you for being here and to her, let me now turn things over to Rabbi Heather Miller.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Streifer. It's amazing to see what you've built at Laasok, and I'm so glad to be part of this. I've tuned into quite a few of the prior programs, and I'm really excited to learn with this esteemed group today. I see a bunch of our Keeping It Sacred members online as well. Hello to you all. We have Corinne from the country of Mauritius on, and what that means is she's 12 hours away from where I'm sitting in the Northern Hemisphere, and she's in the Southern Hemisphere. So we're all studying all together as one global community, and I'm really excited about that. At Keeping It Sacred, we like to open up by dedicating our study. We're nerdy and tenderhearted, so we like to study by lifting up anyone in honor of, with hopes of healing for, pardon me, or in loving memory of. If you have someone that you would like to lift up, please put it in the chat so that we can lift up everyone. If you're studying in honor of, with hopes of healing for, or in loving memory of someone. I'll lift up my grandmother, Kit, for whom Keeping It Sacred was named. Keeping It Sacred is the acronym is KITS community. She always made Judaism accessible, relevant, and empowering. So I'm lifting up her loving memory now because Passover is coming up and we will be celebrating Passover around her Passover table. All right. We have, let's see, we're going to dedicate in loving memory of Rabbi Stanley Davids. May his memory be a blessing. In loving memory of Aaron's niece, Rebecca. In loving memory of Sergei Renner. In loving memory of Barbara's mother. For Pop Hyman Alper, whose yard site is the first night of Pesach. Thank you, sorry. Good to see you. Amy is hoping that Jennifer can feel her best soon. So for hopes of healing for her. In loving memory of Janet's mom. Jerry, I'm not sure if this is for your wife, in honor of, with hopes of healing for, or in loving memory of, but either which way, we are lifting her up in this space. In honor of Rabbi Sally Prezan, thank you, Bob, the first woman rabbi in North America. So glad to have her lifted up, a great mentor and honor. Sherry Fine, who just turned 100, happy birthday to her. we're gonna see all of these names. Just keep looking at all of these names that we're studying in honor of, with hopes of feeling for or in loving memory of all of these beautiful people who inspired us and who led us to this space. And after taking a look at those names in the chat, we'll take a moment to lift up the blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who hallows us with your mitzvot and commands us to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. At keeping it sacred, we say the Torah, the sacred text on the page, but also the Torah, the sacred teachings of our own lives. And especially with a topic, well, I'll say amen to that. And especially with a topic like this, with when we're talking about interfaith marriage, it can be very personal. And so I just want us to be mindful of what we're bringing into this space with all of our connections to this topic. For some of us, it's not only intellectual or philosophical, but it's also personal. And I want to honor that as well. So again, we're talking about sacred couplings, interfaith relationships in the Torah. I'm putting in the chat right here, and Rabbi Streifer has it also. So if anyone needs it a little bit later, you can also see it there. For those of you traveling, like I see Cheryl driving with David across the country right now, I will also put it on screen and we'll also read it out. Safe travels to you both. But I did want to give you a fuller version of the text. We are very nerdy at keeping it sacred, so we really like to get into the text. So I've prepared that for you. Thanks to Sefaria.org. All right. I first want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to present a bit about what the Torah shares about our matriarchs and patriarchs, our forebears, and their connection to interfaith marriage. Then I'm going to get into some of the texts that the Tanakh says against intermarriage. And then we're going to discuss a bit about modern day ideas around intermarriage. I will say I am the product of an interfaith marriage myself. My dad is Unitarian, my mom is Reform and Jewish, and a little bit more about that part of my story will come into play. Also, my wife, when I met her, she was raised Catholic. She ended up converting, but again, that's neither here nor there. It's just a little bit about what I'm bringing into this space. So please feel welcome to think about where you're coming into this discussion as well. All right, so let's start with Genesis 41, verses 41 to 57. I'm not going to put the whole text here. It's, oh, turn up my mic a little bit. Sure, let me see if I can turn up my mic a little bit. Audio settings. Here we go. That should be better. Is that better? Great, I see a thumbs up. Very good. Okay. All right, so thank you for that. If there's any other technical difficulties, just let me or Micah know, and we will strive to accommodate. All right, so Genesis 41, verses 41 to 57, that whole text is in your packet in the PDF, but I did want to focus. We're going to start by thinking a little bit about Joseph, okay? Joseph had a very interesting connection to interfaith marriage. He eventually he was thrown into jail and then saved by the Pharaoh because he made some very keen predictions about the state of the world, and he had these dreams, right? We have a lot of the Jewish people are people of dreamers, and he had these dreams, and the Pharaoh chose to go along with the dreams, and he basically said there would be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of strife, and he advised the Pharaoh to prepare. And so in turn, Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath Paneah, and he gave for him a wife, Osnat, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Okay, so Osnat is a preacher's kid. Okay, just to be clear, preacher's kid. Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt. Joseph traveled through all the land of Egypt, and during the 7 years of plenty, the land produced in abundance. The 7 years of abundance that the land of Egypt enjoyed came to an end, and the 7 years of famine set in, just as Joseph had foretold. There was a famine in all the lands, but throughout the land of Egypt, there was bread. All right, so all the world came to Joseph in Egypt to procure rations, for the famine had become severe throughout the world. Okay, I just want to take that little tiny snippet. You could read the full story in the Torah and the Tanakh, or you can read a little bit more in the text that I've provided for you. But basically, what happens, right? So Pharaoh rewards Joseph, and he sanctions a marriage between him and Osnat, preacher's kid, daughter of On, and things go well. Things go well for him. Not only for him, he and his entire family flourish in Egypt. Remember, we're still in the book of Genesis, not yet in the book of Exodus, but things flourish for him. And not only for him, but also he saves all of Egypt from this famine. And not only all of Egypt, but the world, the entire world comes to Egypt based on Joseph and what he has done, right? So I just want to point out that this is a person who was intermarried and good things came to him. That's all I want to say for now. Good things came about. Okay. And in the text, we know, right? The Ve'ahavta says, right, if you do good things will come to you. If you do bad things will come to you. That's not a theology that I particularly like to ascribe to, but I think it says something here. Okay. So that's Joseph. Okay. Then of course we're going to get to the book of Exodus. Okay. Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 22 in particular, but let's take a look here, right? Many of us know the story of Moses, born into a world where the new Pharaoh did not know the Jewish people, did not know the Israelites. He was afraid of them. He decided that all male children should be put to death. His mom, Yocheved, and sister Miriam decided to save him, put him in a little basket, send him down the river, and he was raised in the Egyptian household, right? The Pharaoh's daughter, when she opened up this little basket on the river, on the Nile, right? It says she saw it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." It's very interesting. She did not discard him. She took him in and raised him as her own. Many of us know the story of him being raised in Egypt. I had a very dear professor of mine at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion who said that Moses got a PhD at the University of Cairo. It's just a way of saying he was fully enmeshed in Egyptian culture and society and learning. And many times people say that his speech impediment wasn't actually a speech impediment. It could have been a speech impediment. Maybe it was also a speech impediment, but also it had to do with him knowing Egyptian and not the ancient Hebrew language. So he was very, very immersed in Egyptian culture. But at some point, it seems like the text is not clear about when or how this happened. You can watch a Disney movie to see what they think when he found out. You can watch another movie, I think it was called Noah, actually, I think there was one. And of course, the 10 Commandments, to see when he actually found out. But at some point he found out, he figured it out. He had this really deep sense of justice, right? Like many of us look to him as inspiration, right? He saw a taskmaster, an Egyptian taskmaster, mistreating an Israelite, and he rose up and he unfortunately killed the person, maybe by accident. But he had this sense of justice, and his dual identity kind of scared him, and he decided to go live in Midian. And he did that when he saw some daughters of the priest of Midian watering their well. He fell in love with Tzipporah, and they took him home to their dad, the priest of Midian. It says, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Tzipporah as a wife. Okay, so who was Moses married to? You know what I'm going to say. A preacher's kid. Bob got it. Bob's laughing. Yeah, a preacher's kid. So that is not interesting. It's kind of interesting, right? There's something that we say when we get married in the Jewish tradition. I'm not marrying you now, I'm already married. But what that saying is Hare at mekudeshet li b'tavad zo kudat Moshe v'Yisrael, which means, behold, you are sanctified to me according to the tradition of Moses and Israel. A lot of people don't want to do interfaith marriages because they don't want someone who's not Jewish to say that, but who's in the tradition of Moses, right? Intermarried couples, it seems like. Okay. So, and how did things go for Moses, right? We're about to celebrate, right? We get redeemed. We get the connection with the people of Israel forever. And in Exodus 18:1, what happens? He goes back and he sees his father-in-law, Jethro, priest of Midian. Notice again, the text is noting that he's a priest of Midian, right? Moses' father-in-law heard all that God had done for Moses and Israel, God's people, how Adonai had brought Israel out from Egypt. And he said to him, right? Now listen to me, I will give you counsel and God be with you. You represent the people before God. You bring the disputes before God. Right? You're wearing yourself out, Moses. As your father-in-law, I'm telling you, you shall also seek out from among all the people capable individuals who fear God, trustworthy ones who spurn ill-gotten gain. Set these over them as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Okay, so this intermarriage was beneficial for Moses. Not only was he, did he have success in his endeavors in the same way that Joseph did, but he also ended up having children. But he also got some really invaluable advice from his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And so it just, again, in the text, it's reminding us that there are some benefits to going outside one's own people and getting the wisdom from there and bringing it in and thinking about how it might be relevant to us today. Moses heeded his father-in-law and did just as he said. All right, we're going to do one more of the matriarchs and patriarchs, and then we'll pause for a quick moment, okay? All right, Ruth. Many of you are like, oh, I knew she was going to go there. Okay, Ruth. Okay, there's the story of Ruth. Ruth is the daughter-in-law to Naomi, and her husband dies, the son of Naomi. They end up going back, and Naomi wants to go back to Judah, but Ruth is a Moabite woman, and she refuses to leave her mother-in-law. She says, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. And here's the famous line, for wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. And she keeps going, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may God do to me if anything but death parts me from you. Okay, so there was a real connection here between these two women. There is a real sense of fidelity and loyalty and honor and respect. And the text goes on, because what happens when Ruth goes back with Naomi to Judah in Ruth chapter 4, verses 9 through 17, enter Boaz. Boaz is this guy. So Boaz married Ruth and she became his wife, and he cohabitated with her. The Lord let her conceive and she bore a son. They named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, father of David. Okay, so what happens? Ruth ends up intermarrying, and what happens? Do you think it's good? It couldn't be better. She becomes the mother of Jesse, who's the father of David, and the Davidic line leads to Moshiach. Bob did the hands. Moshiach, right? Moshiach. You're very animated today, Bob, and you're in bright green, so it's perfect. I can see you. I'm not picking on you. It's great. Moshiach, right? So with this interfaith family and these relationships comes the Messiah. Okay? So that is in the Tanakh. I'm not saying it's the only thing in the Tanakh. I'm saying I'm just presenting you with three ideas here. 3 ideas. Joseph flourished in Egypt, and he saved his brothers from the famine and really the whole world. Moses gathered his strength, had children, and learned about sustainable leadership from his father-in-law Jethro. And Ruth bore Jesse, from which the Messiah comes. Okay. So 3 fortuitous tales of intermarriage, perhaps we would say intermarriage gone right, interfaith connections, interfaith families, benefiting Jewish life, benefiting Judaism. Yeah, Daniel sums it up in the chat. So basically, some of the biggest Jewish role models come from intermarriage. You could say that. You could say that. Yes, Jerry, 2 priests give their daughters. Yes, this is a theme, it seems. Anyone else have any thoughts on just that? We will get into what the Tanakh says against intermarriage in a minute, but anything else? Alan, with these parts of our tradition, as well as others, why does the conservative and Orthodox movement not accept intermarriage? We were coming to that now. Okay, great. Right, and Rabbi Micah Streifer says, come from intermarriage and or are intermarried. Right. Carol Kurtz, hi Carol, good to see you. Says the first 2 examples are pre-giving of the Torah and halacha. Very good. That is the case. That is the case. So these were considered to be the big deals at the time. Did people fuss over this? It doesn't seem they fussed over it. But you know, I'm sure in every age, I'm a firm believer that in every age, right? This is what people argue about, I'm sure. An argument can be made that Ruth converted, but I don't buy it because that didn't exist as a concept then. Right. So some people might say that Ruth actually converted to Judaism. Some people might say that of course Zipporah converted to Judaism. I haven't heard that about Osnat, but you know, I think that there are readings that would the rabbinic commentaries would assert or imagine into the text through midrashic readings that's what happened, and that's fair too. That is part of our tradition, right? To imagine into the text from our own context, right? But when we imagine into the text from our own context, we're bringing in parts of ourselves here as well. Chelsea, hi Chelsea, says Moses' speech impediment was an accident. Yes, you hadn't heard that. I'm glad that you heard that. Okay, very good. All right, we're going to continue on. Oh yes, thank you, Rabbi Streifer. Yes, Osnat being the daughter of Dinah, maybe she was a nice Jewish girl, right? But then how's she the daughter of Potiphar, and maybe that was Dinah, and right there we can go into it. Good. Okay, let's take a look at some other sides. Okay, and yet there were also warnings in the Tanakh. Okay, briefly, just to name 3 of them. Again, just to name 3 of the matriarchs and patriarchs, but here we're going to name 3 of the warnings. Exodus 34:15-16, among that text says, you must not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, for they will lust after their gods and sacrifice to their gods and invite you, and you will eat of their sacrifices. Okay, so I want to think through, what is the warning about? What are they concerned about, right? We usually say, what's bothering Rashi? You can say, like, what's bothering the text here? Deuteronomy, for you shall not intermarry with them, for they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods, and Adonai's anger will blaze forth against you, promptly wiping you out. Big warning, right? Alert, alert, do not intermarry, right? That's what this is saying. Janet, would you like to say something? You'll have to unmute though.
Okay, I was going to put it into the chat. Weren't they afraid that if there was intermarriage, that they would lose their Judaism, that they would then assimilate and the Jews would disappear? I mean, isn't that the same thing that people worry about today, especially after the Holocaust? You know, they say like so many Jews were, 6 million were killed. And so like you need to, Jews need to marry Jews and raise Jewish children to make up for all that was lost. And yet I know my synagogue in particular is very, very welcoming to interfaith couples. And they do a blessing on Yom Kippur for the parent, the non-Jewish parent who has chosen to raise the children, Jewish. So I think that by giving by focusing on the positive and not saying like, oh, it's interfaith, so, they're all going to like forget their Judaism and like Judaism will disappear, is not looking at the whole picture. And it's not like you said, it's not looking at the contributions that other cultures could bring, because it's not like, we believe in Judaism, but it's not like other religions don't have something good to offer. And we should be open to that.
That you're looking at this from your context in your synagogue life, and from the things that you have heard. I'm sure many of us here are thinking about all of the things that we've heard about intermarriage, and I'm sure we've gotten earfuls, all of us, pros and cons, right, throughout our lives. Keep those things in mind. Janet, please remind me when we get to Isabel Wilkerson, if you'll please just raise your hand in the chat, and I will remember to say something about that line about the disappearing Jewish people. I'm just going to keep going a little bit. I really want to stay on these texts here. With Ezra. Ezra says, in Ezra and Nehemiah were really not for intermarriage. And he says, the holy seed has become intermingled with the peoples of the land. And then I excised some text, so I wanted to share with you this part. He says, oh my God, I am too ashamed and mortified to lift my face to you, oh my God, for our iniquities are overwhelming and our guilt has grown as high as heaven. Okay. He was really not interested in intermarriage. He was very, very concerned about what might happen if people intermarried. Okay. So in the Tanakh, we have positive human life stories about intermarriage and what it has brought our people. And at the same time, we have these very stern warnings. And I asked a question at the beginning, what is bothering the text? What does the text seem to be most concerned about? And Susan's hand is up, but I see Susan put in the chat. Thank you for putting in the chat. I will weave it in. If you put things in the chat, everybody, it would be great. There's a concept of one God, right? There was this concern about following after other gods, right? So it's worth holding a space for that. But also those of you who are products of intermarriage, those of you who know people who are intermarried, you might start thinking, and you might know, like, maybe that happens. But more often than not, in my experience as a rabbi, almost 17 years now, that's not what happens. So it's just something worth holding, right? I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I just want to share that. Good, Anne, you're jumping ahead. Good, we are on the same page. Watch this. And perfect. Okay. So Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Ezra are concerned about lusting after other gods, but countless other texts. There are countless other texts in favor of or against intermarriage. In Parshanut, in Talmud, in codes, there's the pros and cons of intermarriage. There's this old joke about this new rabbi who comes to the synagogue, and half the congregation's like, we stand for the Shema. And the other half is saying, we sit for the Shema. We stand for the Shema. We sit for the Shema. And then this old guy comes in the back and he's like, oh, I'll tell you what our tradition does. Because the rabbi's like desperate to find out what is the actual tradition. He says, our tradition is that we argue over if we should stand or sit for the Shema, right? So we might have come to that place in Judaism where our tradition is this arguing, right? We certainly have centuries upon centuries of examples of that. Okay, thanks, Micah. Yeah, it is a great joke. Okay, so it's much like how we debate these things in contemporary times. Okay, sorry, I see your hand up. Would you like to say something here, or should we keep going, or would you like to put it in the chat?
It was about Ezra, so yes. Do you want me to wait?
Yeah, I mean, you could say, right, Amy's mentioning about Ezra as well.
Sure, so Ezra is used as the foundation in the Talmud, basically, because they needed a piece of scripture that would back up. The conversation they were having was about determining membership, right, in the tribe based on who was the parent of the child.
Mhm.
Those couples were specifically concerned with indentured or enslaved people and what happens when you mix that up. Ezra shows up history-wise after they've built the second temple. He was not there. He shows up. And I mean, it's amazing to me that we don't talk about this more because it is well documented. The reason why he said all that was because he presented to the people who had been there, oh, Hashem is not going to come back to this new temple unless you exile all your non-Jewish wives and their offspring.
Right.
I mean, that is literally in the textbook of how do you take control of a population. I mean, literally it subjugate and oppress the women. It is 100%, built and entrenched in some of the worst ideas that we have in any tradition. And it is insane to me that, we don't call the Talmudists out on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lots
Sorry.
of thoughts, obviously. I'll stop. Thank
Good.
you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Rabbi
please,
Heather.
please put stuff in the chat as well. But thank you. And Sari is an amazing member of Keeping It Sacred. And we're so glad to have you here. And we actually went to college together, women's college. So like, it's a very interesting thing to think about these things through the lens of gender as well, which I haven't even touched upon, around the difference between a man marrying a woman or a woman marrying a man in a heteronormative context. Again, that's what the world they were working in. Okay. All right, let's keep going a little bit and let's chew on some contemporary thoughts on this. Okay. I want to start with emancipation, okay? Because medieval Judaism was a lot different than modern Judaism. And when the Jews were emancipated in France in 1791, I see. Okay, here we go. In 1791, we had this option. And here's where I think, Anne, you were the one who commented this, right? Assimilation, this question of assimilation. We could either die by fire, by being evaporated into the general culture through assimilation, or we could die by ice, by freezing ourselves and calcifying ourselves in old traditions that would be unsurvivable in the new context, okay? We had those two options, and from that point on, modern Judaism has been about how do we and when do we and what are the choices we make about being in the middle. Good old liquid, right? Not death by fire, steam, not death by ice, but water, right? How do we balance being people in the modern world as well as relying on and continuing our traditions? Okay, I had another rabbi in rabbinical school. These were very formative years, obviously. And he, one of my rabbis would walk kind of like this, back and forth, side to side every time he walked. And he said it's because he has one foot in the modern world and one foot in the world of old. And so that's kind of what we're doing. That's kind of what we do. Thank you. Okay. Good. I see some good stuff in the text. Good. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Mike Streifer, for putting some of that stuff in. Okay, so so that's when we really started having the question. Before then, it was medieval times. We were living in shtetls. We weren't allowed to get married under the civil law. The concept of civil law didn't exist. So emancipation. Okay, and right after emancipation, guess what happened? Napoleon brought together a Sanhedrin of Jews in 1806. And he asked them 22 questions about what their answers to the questions of assimilation would be. How assimilated into French life would they get? And number 3, his third question that he asked them was, I love this. He wanted to know, does Jewish law permit a Jewess to marry a Christian man or a Jew to marry a Christian woman? Or may they marry only other Jews? Okay. This was a very hard question to answer because what? If they answered, no, we do not intermarry, then Napoleon and his people would say, what, we're not good enough for you, right? And if they answer, of course we intermarry, then the anti-Semites among them will say, well, we've got to keep these Jews from marrying our daughters and sons, right? And they would have had the gender binary then, right? that's where this conversation was headed, right? And they were so smart. I love it. Their response was essentially that the religious act of marriage must be preceded by a civil contract. Okay. They basically said, whatever the law allows. So, like, you decide, Napoleon. They also, in their response, mentioned the Catholic Church. Ellen Spiegel would like to control my camera. I'm not sure what that's about, but okay.
Cancel that now.
I did cancel. Thank you. And they also mentioned basically like whatever the Catholics do, will do. But at the time, the Catholics were not into intermarriage, so they were also off the hook there. But they were linking themselves with another group that was also a minority group, just to show, like, you know, we're not outliers in this. We're not special. We have our own way of doing things. Okay, so that was their answer. So that, of course, when the Reform movement was starting right around this time. The Reform Front, which is translated from the German into as the Friends of Reform, which was a lay group, by the way. Lay leaders, you have a lot of power, more than the rabbis in this case. Remember that. The Reform movement was started by lay people. The lay people eventually created a movement, and rabbis joined it. And by 1844, they had their very first rabbinical convention. And this is what I wrote my thesis on. I love it. 1844 rabbinical conference. They asked about intermarriage. They asked 3 things. I will not tell you about the other 2 because we don't have too much time, but you can email me and I'm happy to share it with you. They asked about intermarriage. So guys, what are we going to do about this intermarriage thing? That's what they asked each other. The very first Reform rabbinical convention. Why? Because they were thinking about how assimilationist are we going to be? How traditional are we going to be? What are the pros and cons? How are we building our community in this new context? Right? Questions that we would ask. What did they do? They endorsed the prior conclusions of that Napoleonic Sanhedrin, arguing that the marriage of a Jew with the adherent of any other, here's what they added, monotheistic religion. So they narrowed it to monotheistic religions. They said it was permissible in Judaism. They didn't even put it on the civil authorities. They said it's permissible in Judaism as long as the civil law permits the children of such a union to be raised in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish religion. Okay. Now, I translated this original text. There's like the minutes from this meeting. They're really fascinating. That was part of my thesis. And someone translated into Hebrew, and they used the word gam, which means also. They also were saying that it's permitting the children of such a union to be raised also in the Jewish religion, which means that they were not essentially afraid of the children assimilating out. They were like, look, just give us a fair shot. Just let us teach the children Judaism, and that's fine. It will be permissible. It's very, very interesting. Right. So now, correct. Everyone who's putting in the chat, right? What about someone not without a religion? What about Jewish continuity, narrowly defined through reproduction being key, right? What if someone's religion is polytheistic, right? Yes. All of those questions, especially today, but in their world, they're less likely to encounter some of those questions. But it was still much more like, I mean, I'm sure, are many of you surprised at this answer in 1844, right? Probably many of us are very surprised that this was the answer. I know I was. That's why I had to learn more and wrote my thesis on it. And especially around since then, right? Since then, the pendulum has kind of swung back, right? In 1980, the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, in the Reform movement. Again, I'm giving some Reform context because I come from the Reform movement, but also it's the more liberal, one of the more liberal movements on this question, Reconstructionist being another one. In 1980, they ruled against mixed marriage. In 83, though, they accepted patrilineal descent, which I find very interesting because it's reminding you that intermarriage was still going on. It was still happening, but that's how they decided to deal with it. In 84, they argued against a rabbi officiating at a mixed marriage, and all the more so at a co-officiation officiated ceremony. In 2001, they were against intermarried Jews becoming rabbis. In fact, on my rabbinical school application, they had us all sign a blue piece of paper that said, I'm not currently, nor will I ever be in a serious romantic relationship with a non-Jew. Okay. You can imagine how I felt about that, being the product of an interfaith marriage. It definitely made me feel like a second-class citizen, like I was somehow not as Jewish as my colleagues who had two Jewish parents, right? We're going to talk about push out in a second. But some of these things were there. Now, in 2024, Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion changed their policy, and now they will admit intermarried students as long as the children are raised as Jews. Okay. It's just very, very interesting the way that they're cutting this line. But I want you to see how, like, in the modern context, we pick up on this debate and these questions about assimilation and about tradition and, you know, depleting the tradition and what happens. And it's reflected in our policies. All right. So earlier I shared with you this question or this piece about my own history. I'm going to share with you my own history. So I'm the product of an interfaith marriage. And I remember going to religious school. I did go to Hebrew school. And a kid said to me, "You're not really Jewish because your dad's not Jewish." Now, from what we know about traditional Judaism, Judaism goes through the mom. So it was just an ignorant statement anyway. But on top of that, I think that there's this question of push out, right? A lot of times people say, right, remember a lot of those questions from the Tanakh are that that people will go lust after other gods, right? And that we're going to just drop out of Judaism. But in my personal experience, right, it was a question of push out. People pushed me out because they made me feel like a second-class citizen in my Judaism, in what I would have otherwise had a happy a happy religious upbringing, right? A religious school upbringing. Okay. It happens to a lot of people. The push out factor is real. Sari mentioned earlier in the chat that she's leader of an interfaith couples group, you know, family group, products of interfaith marriage, right? I'm sure that there's many, right, adult children of intermarriages. You know, there's a lot of stigma out there. There's a lot of things. And it was Janet who mentioned the piece about, you know, we've heard this too. Products of intermarriage, adult children of intermarriage have heard the statement, right? In 10th grade, I was told, literally in 10th grade, I was told by my Jewish studies teacher that, well, if you have a Jew marry a non-Jew, then they have a half Jew. And then if they marry a non-Jew, then there's a quarter Jew. And then if they have a quarter Jew, then, you know, eventually there'll be no Jews left and Hitler wins. They put the Hitler piece on it. Okay. Now, I am a rabbi who officiates intermarriage. So I tell my couples this so that they're not surprised that that sentiment is out there. I can't tell you how incredibly disheartening that is to think that the product of an intermarriage would be a threat in that way. But I told this to one of my wedding couples, and the non-Jewish bride said to me, really? She said, I thought Hitler only wins when we only marry our own kind. When we say we can only marry and preserve the purity of the race, right? So there are arguments in that direction as well, right? So I'm putting forward to you some things, some statements that I want you to hear, because I want you to understand how hurtful some of these things are that can be said. I want you to understand that there's different ways that you can look at this subject, and to think about, like, what is the incentive for the product of an interfaith marriage to continue participating in Jewish life if this is what we hear, right? Thank God I had my grandma Kit who told me we were We were part of the Kohanim. And so I was a real Jewish American princess. In the 80s, that was a good thing. And so here I am today. But I'll tell you, the Jewish community did not make it easy. It did not make it easy in general. So I just want to put that out there. And I want to tell you that this whole idea about push out is real. In fact, in Boston, the CJP, the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, really put it to a test. They thought, well, you know what? I bet you push out is real. And if push out's real, then what should happen if we pump in a lot of money to different congregations in the greater Boston area for interfaith families, for the children of interfaith families, for a spirit of inclusion and welcome? What results would we get? If push out is real, we should what? We should have people affiliating with Judaism, even as products of interfaith marriage. And guess what they did? They did exactly that. And they said intermarried families with Jewish children are generally as observant as in-married families, especially Reform families, and their children become B'nai Mitzvah at the same rates. And then they tested it again in 2015, and there was a CJP study. Intermarriage rates at the time were around 47%. And in 2015, across a myriad of dimensions, this is what the report says, in-married and interfaith families raising Jewish children look strikingly similar. Now, I did say raising Jewish children, right? So some of you might say, but they said raising Jewish children, so you can't raise them both, and you can't raise them any other way. I'm not saying anything different. I'm just sharing with you the text here, right? I was personally raised both. I did go to a religious school, Hebrew school, but then I also, knew about my grandmother's Unitarianism, and we did have a Christmas tree. Oh my goodness, that might be shocking for some of you, but that's the way people can, it's not a fait accompli, is what I want to say. When someone is intermarried, there's a lot of different ways someone can be intermarried, what an interfaith relationship can look like. It can look like someone going to their own house of worship and someone else going to their Jewish house of worship, but it can also look like someone just raised Catholic and the other person going to Jewish services or celebrating holidays. It can look like a lot of different constellations. And so that's part of it. Good. Okay. Yeah, I see Cynthia was pushed into Jewish life instead of out. Very good. Beautiful. Everyone take a look at the chat. There's good. Probably varies by family, whether high holiday Judaism appearing every Saturday or something in between them. Right, Amy? And what's the litmus test for Jewish identity anyway, right? Many people, do grade authenticity of minority identity based on who you marry, right? Oh, that person's not really Black because they didn't marry someone who's Black, right? They're watered down. That person married someone who's, not Asian, and they're Asian, so they're not really Asian, right? We've heard these things, right? We know this. This is what minority communities do. We try to say that we're the most authentic, right? It's a vicious game, right? The Brahmins, especially, right? So Isabel Wilkerson wrote Caste, and part of what she mentions in Caste, some of you probably have read it since it's a Jewish social justice group, but she did mention that the sign of caste is endogamy, that creates an unjust system. So if you ask, in what ways is intermarriage or interfaith couplings a social justice issue, right? Why are we talking about this here at Laasok, right? Because it's a social justice issue. Social justice is the pursuit of a fair and equitable society where everyone has equal rights, opportunities, and access to resources, regardless of their background and identity. So that factor of push out makes this a social justice issue. And that's what I mentioned about Isabel Wilkerson. All right, so we're going to take some questions, but just the concluding questions that I have for each of us are to ask ourselves, and I do this too, right? How do I feel about intermarriage and why? What are the life experiences? What are the messages around intermarriage that I have gotten? And what do I feel about it based on that? Okay. How are my personal experiences with the subject coloring my understanding? And third, how might a spirit of inclusion impact the Jewish community, right? How can we lift this up as a social justice issue and think about it in a way of inclusion and equity and fairness, essentially. All right, so that thank you. Let's take some questions now. I want to always start with those who have not yet shared something, because I firmly believe that if we all share at least something, a question, a thought, a reflection, an understanding, that that we all benefit from that. So does anyone who hasn't shared something yet want to share something? I see Jennifer says Christians do it too. If you don't follow their exact denominations, you aren't a true Christian. It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere, right? We're not like, this is what people do. Right. Some people say that they were raised Jewish. Okay, Peter, you did have your hand up for a while. And Peter and Joy Vanek, would you like to unmute and share?
Noise in the background, so I'll pass.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Others, do other people have things to think about? Yeah, people are talking about all the different ways to be Jewish. Yes, there are so many different ways to be Jewish, and there's so many ways to be not Jewish. So as a rabbi who officiates, right, I like to think about who's sitting in front of me and in what ways can I help them? Okay, we need to get away from thinking Judaism is like Christianity and Islam, that it's a universalizing religion. It's an ethno-religion, more indigenous religions based on specific place and time and communal connection, not just saying the right words and not eating the correct foods. Yeah, so Emily is bringing up, there's lots of different ways to identify as Jewish, right? You can identify as Jewish based on how often you go to temple, or if you keep kosher, you can identify as Jewish here. Emily's suggesting that we think about it as an ethno-religion. Some people might think about Judaism as values-based and social justice-based. Yeah, sorry says it's a social justice issue because it's one group deciding on how others get to live. Yes. Okay. Susan.
Thank you, and hi again.
Hi again.
I grew up in a Jewish household. We were Reformish observant. I have two sisters. Both of them did not marry Jewish people. I'm single and I'm Reformish observant. One of my sisters, I think, lost faith in everything because my father died when she was 10. And she married a Buddhist and her children are nothing. My other sister also married a non-Jew, and she raised her daughter as Jewish, but they also observed some of the traditions of his mother, her mother-in-law, like going to mass on Christmas. But now that offspring is nothing too. So one of the observations I had about the Boston survey, and I'll just be quick, is the real question is, what is the rate of intermarried families who actually practice Judaism? They talk about how if they observe, it's much like two parents. But what about those who just drop out?
Right. Yeah. So in the CJP study, they're affiliating at the same rates as in married couples, right? So I think the real question is how do they do it, right? How do we welcome? I think that's a question for us or for our Jewish communities to think about. How do we welcome people? How do we welcome everyone? But how do we welcome specifically interfaith families into this so that, like, I don't know if your nephews or, if they ever felt push out instead of dropout, right? Did something happen in their lives? What was that like? It's worth asking. It's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about how do we.
Well, they were raised with nothing. They were raised with no religion in that family.
Right. But also, right, they might have had something happen, right? There's lots of different ways to think about this. Just because you're not raised with anything, if you do know that one of your parents is Jewish, right, there's an opportunity there. Maybe you know, maybe there was something that happened that, you know, there's messages. Society is giving us messages all the time. And if they ever heard, you know, it depends on which parent was the Jewish one and not as well in the Jewish community. But, you know, it's worth thinking about, like, did they experience something? Had they ever thought about, did they ever feel like Judaism was open to them equally? Could they ever be a full citizen of Judaism, right? Not citizen in terms of voting or anything, but I mean citizen, like nobody wants to, who wants to join a club where you're going to be a second class citizen, right? That's my point. Who wants to join that? I didn't. I dropped out of a religious school, you know? You know, did they ever feel like they could really claim this identity? And what made them feel that way, or what was lacking? I think these are real big questions that we as Jewish community makers should be thinking about. I see we have 1 minute left. I want to take Eric's hand, and then I'll turn it back over to Rabbi Streifer. Eric, you get the last word.
Oh no, I have a wandering thought, but I liked your questions, and just thinking about how I'm a child of interfaith. I was actually raised Christianity, so studying Judaism was kind of how I was allowed to continue being religious as an atheist. Like moving away from Christianity and just being able to study religion and like get my questions answered. But I also grew up in South Dakota, and they had a little Reformed temple out there. And so I thought I was learning what Judaism was. And so to me, it was like a reflection of me, where Judaism was this thing that accepted, sort of like the water you were talking about it to me, like Judaism's water. But it's also like without these like forms. Yeah, I'm trying to rush it into a minute, but it's weird. Like, so I feel a little uncomfortable with interfaith marriage. It's like I like these straight lines, you know, and I guess the thing it was making me think of is like I live in North Brooklyn, and we have a lot of trans people here, and a lot of people are like, no, you can't cross those lines, you know, it's this and that, and like there is no intersex, but the fact is scientifically there is. And then there's a lot of people, and it's like, are you really trans, are you really this? And everybody's trying to like figure this out. Meanwhile, these people are existing. And so in Judaism there's a lot of like people like me, but I also feel like I don't really fit, but you know, because like I'm not the real idea of it, you know. So but then like also my tradition exists, you know, and I exist. So it's kind of a weird in between, but interesting. I loved just going back to the text today. Thank you so much.
I think that's a perfect way to end, Eric. You know, just thinking about how we're all in between in different ways and different identities, and just to make space for each other to explore identities and claim identities. It's really important that we allow people to do that. It should be a human right that we should be able to do those things on the gender spectrum or the religious spectrum or anywhere else, right? We just need to make room for people to be their full selves. And thank you for that. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating this way. Thank you, Rabbi Streifer, and the entire Laasok community. It's great to have had this hour with you all.